Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company is mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट, मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए JSW कलर ऑन प्लस की छत, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। JSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
JSW नियो स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना।
JSW नियो स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील, मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस।
कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा, और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Our today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. today is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Our today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के इस सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that would compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus in Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up a state-of-the-art integrated steel plant at Kalinganagar, Odisha in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinganagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Usha Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company is mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट, मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस की छत, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। GSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
GSW नियो स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना। JSW नियो स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील, मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस। कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are a $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Today is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के इस सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that would compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus in Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up a state-of-the-art integrated steel plant at Kalinganagar, Odisha in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinganagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Usha Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company has mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट, मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस की छत, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। GSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
GSW नियो स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना। JSW नियो स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील, मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस। कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला।
तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं, जो तेरा वो मेरा और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve.
Pleasure.
Penny, good to see you literally flying the flag of Canberra behind you.
I thought it might be appropriate for the day, at least to pretend.
Very nice.
Is it just me or is that someone else's audio?
No, I can hear it too.
Tanya, any last minute instructions?
No, I don't think so. We've had a chance to have a little brief beforehand. Abe will start, then I will speak and introduce the session and then hand over to High Commissioner O'Farrell, followed by Ambassador Wadwa, and then we'll proceed with the panel, starting with you. So after Ambassador Wadwa has spoken, I'll then introduce everybody by name and then turn over to you, Penny, as the first speaker.
Sure.
Great, thanks.
Should we start? I everybody has come in. I think
good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of the CII Partnership Summit 2020. We start today's proceedings with a country session on Australia. The moderator for the session is Ms. Tanya Spisba, Director, Australia-India Institute. Before taking on this role, Tanya was a diplomat, an Australian diplomat to India. I will now request Tanya to take over and start the session. Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you very much, Abe, and welcome everyone. 2020 has clearly been a challenging year for every country on this planet, but in challenging times, friendships are tested and can flourish. Australia and India can attest to this flourishing friendship and are natural partners in an increasingly contested Indo-Pacific. In June of this year, we saw our Prime Ministers agreeing a comprehensive strategic framework designed to ensure greater collaboration on the challenges of our times in cyber and cyber-enabled critical technology, in healthcare and medical advancement, in the mining processes for critical and strategic minerals, agriculture and water management cooperation, education, tourism, energy and environment, among other things. In many ways, our deep cultural and strategic ties have paved the way to enrich an even stronger trade and investment relationship. Many of the sectors I've just outlined being ready for further investment and development between Australia and India. Today, in this Australia session, we are fortunate to have a preview of the CII Australia Economic Strategy with the esteemed Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, author of this report, with us. This report will be officially launched tomorrow by Indian Minister of Commerce, Piyush Goyal. This strategy is the complement to the India Economic Strategy, authored by Peter Varghese and launched by the government in 2018. Today, though, I would like to welcome initial remarks from the High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell. The High Commissioner served in Parliament of New South Wales from 1995 to 2015, including as the state's 43rd Premier between 2011 and 2014. As Premier, Mr. O'Farrell initiated and led annual trade missions to India to promote economic, cultural and social links between New South Wales and the states of India. He famously also had the foresight to pen a sister state relationship between New South Wales and Gujarat with then former Chief Minister Narendra Modi. Mr. O'Farrell has been sworn in officially as High Commissioner this year in 2020, and what a challenging year this has been for the High Commissioner. Under his leadership, the relationship has continued to grow, and we now look forward to opening remarks from High Commissioner O'Farrell, please.
Namaskar and good afternoon to those who are in Australia. I'm delighted to join the CII Partnership Summit 2020 for this special Australian session. It has been, as has been said, a particularly tough year, and it can be easy to focus on the challenges that we've all faced. Certainly responded to the COVID pandemic has been the biggest because it impacts on our countries, our communities, our commerce, and in an unprecedented and profound way. Our economies have been hit for 6, with both Australia and India recording economic contractions after years of uninterrupted growth. And it's taken place against a background of increasing geostrategic competition in our Indo-Pacific neighbourhood. We're seeing pressures on global rules, norms and institutions which underpin our nation's security, stability and prosperity. In face of these challenges, Australia's message is clear. We believe we need to do everything possible to give our businesses, economies and the Indo-Pacific region at large the maximum opportunities to trade, invest and recover. We must liberalise, integrate, collaborate and innovate. Despite the challenges we all face, we can and should be optimistic about the future, about the new opportunities and about our partnerships. In signing a comprehensive strategic partnership in June, Prime Ministers Modi and Morrison set us all an ambitious task to strengthen the foundations of our bilateral relationship. Globally and within our region, the Australian and Indian governments are working closer than ever. Through the Quad, where together with the United States and Japan, we're deepening strategic cooperation and stand in firm agreement on the importance of strengthening the resilience of regional supply chains, key cyber-enabled systems and critical infrastructure. Through the United Nations, where we're supporting India's membership of the Security Council, and through the G20, where we're working together to support strong, sustainable and balanced growth outcomes. At a bilateral level, we're increasing trade and investment with India. We've implemented 26 practical initiatives under the government's Indian economic strategy. Earlier this year, our Trade Minister led a successful Australian-India business exchange trade mission here to India. Our new diplomatic mission in Calcutta is playing a crucial role in fostering closer business ties, particularly in the resource sector. And we've extended the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund to help build links between our education and research institutions. Importantly, our economic relationship is diversified and complementary, ensuring a broad range of Australian and Indian businesses benefit. Australian businesses are providing India with high-quality goods and growth-enabling services, including raw materials to fuel India's manufacturing sector and expertise in mining services and technology, all in support of Prime Minister Modi's self-reliance mission. There are great synergies to be found in providing stable and expanding supplies of critical minerals and rare earths, particularly with India's ambitions to boost the number of electric vehicles on its roads and renewable energy powering Indian industry and homes. Under a new agreement on cyber and cyber-enabled technologies, we're collaborating closely to enhance digital trade, harness critical technology opportunities, and address cybersecurity challenges. I'm pleased that large Australian companies, including ANZ, Telstra, Kmart Australia Sourcing Services, have established innovation and capability centres in Bengaluru. We look forward to working with India to be a global technology shaper. We're cooperating in the health sector, and I again want to recognise the crucial role that Indian companies will play in the global rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. Australia Super, our largest superannuation fund, is investing almost $1 billion as part of an agreement with the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund of India. In the infrastructure sector, Australia's Macquarie Infrastructure and Real Estate Assets is the largest foreign investor in toll roads across India and retains a strong appetite to do more. Australia's education institutions continue with their engagement in India. We look forward to hearing from Deakin University today about some of the opportunities that exist for bilateral engagement in the higher education sector. We want to strengthen our alliance in space and welcome reforms that will open up India's space sector to commercial opportunities on an end-to-end space missions. And there's scope to boost our partnership in the circular economy to make our communities and economies more sustainable. I've mentioned these examples to highlight the breadth and the depth of our economic relationship and the numerous and diverse opportunities available to Australian and Indian businesses and organisations. Collaboration and innovation are amongst the greatest strengths of our Australia-India partnership. A partnership which is strong, and we're working it hard together. It's an effort I'm sure will deliver greater wins, stronger growth, stronger and faster recovery for both countries. I look forward to hearing from today's panellists who represent a wide range of important sectors. I encourage you all to use this session to share insights, build connections, and help us build upon the foundations laid to date. Obviously, I'm also looking very much forward to the launch of CII's Australia Economic Strategy tomorrow, and I congratulate in advance Ambassador Anil Vadva for his energy, efforts, and above all, his patience. The Australian Economic Strategy is a validation of the promise both countries recognise in our economic relationship, and a reflection of the spirit of partnership which underpins Australia's relationship with India. At the end of a year of major challenges, where citizens, companies and countries appreciated more than ever before the value of trusted and reliable friends, I remain incredibly optimistic about the years ahead for our two nations and their ongoing relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, for those very important words. I would now like to introduce Ambassador Anil Vadva. Since 2018, Ambassador Vadva has been chair of the Confederation of Indian Industry Australia Economic Strategy Task Force. As the High Commissioner alluded to, this has been a report that has been in the process for a couple of years, and we are excited that this will be launched tomorrow by the Commerce Minister, Piyush Goyal. We are very fortunate to have a preview today, which I understand has been updated in part in light of COVID, which has affected both economies this year. Ambassador Wadhwa has been a member of the Indian Foreign Service from 1979 till 2017. He served as ambassador to Poland, Oman, Thailand, and Italy. He was Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs from 2014 to 2016, looking after relations with Southeast Asia, Australasia, and the Pacific, Gulf and West Asia, and North Africa. He was also the lead of Indian delegation to all senior official meetings of ASEAN, ASEM, Arab League, and the East Asia Summit. He therefore has a very deep knowledge not only of Australia, but of the Indo-Pacific region and how this strategy can help Australia and India bring closer trade and economic ties. Ambassador Wadhwa, please.
Well, thank you very much, Tanya, for that introduction. It's such a pleasure to be invited to speak at this event today and to connect with a host of stakeholders who are involved with taking this relationship between India and Australia forward. High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell has provided a great overview of the relationship. So my job is just to fill in the blanks before we start our discussions amongst some very eminent panelists who are present today. Let me start by saying that since the onset of the pandemic, the global value chains or regional value chains, as we know them, have been disrupted, and the overdependence of China in this region has come to the fore. And India has been actually in confrontation with heavy deployments on the line of actual control with China for the past 8 months. Australia has also faced aggressive and coercive Chinese actions on the trade front. And Prime Minister Modi is therefore in India stressed on the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India. In India, this pandemic has resulted in a number of reforms which have happened in the mining, healthcare, agriculture, power, defense, space, electronics, and textile sectors in particular. But the cabinet has also announced incentives now for 10 sectors for a manufacturing boost, in addition to the electronics and the mobile handsets sectors which were announced earlier. Also, new funding has been announced for the healthcare sector, and the definition of medium and small enterprises has been revised, plus a relief package for these industries has been announced. And I think more reforms will follow. Our budget is going to follow shortly, and we will see a lot of progressive steps coming up in the future. So the sum total is that India today is focusing on simplifying the difficulties which are faced in things like land acquisition and labor laws reform and liquidity in order to attract more investments. India, by and large, offers a large market where growth opportunities are plenty. Australian Prime Minister Mr. Scott Morrison has also announced similar policies to boost domestic self-reliance, and especially for critical materials and supplies. If we look at the bilateral scenario in recent months, India and Australia have successfully concluded a very important summit between the two prime ministers. That happened in June. And then they concluded an important logistics summit between the two trade ministers of the two countries, which happened in September, where they've agreed on a resilience supply chain initiative. They've also agreed to collaborate across the board in multilateral institutions in the UN, as well as in the context of G20, which has now emerged as a very important grouping in the post-pandemic world. In November, we had a milestone where the Australian Navy also participated in the Malabar joint naval exercise with India, Japan, and the USA. And so, in my view, the changed geopolitical scenario in our region and the world offers some excellent prospects for enhancement of our economic ties in some very critical areas. And of course, these, some of them, you named them yourself, Tanya, in your introduction, like scientific and health cooperation, space and defense, critical minerals and related technologies, water resources and management, training and education, the circular economy, waste to wealth processes, the grains management and logistics, very important now in India, and cyber technology, which is so important for both Australia and India. Uh, in sum, I would think that Australia and India have realized the importance of their partnership on commitments to a rules-based order, the post-COVID economic rebalancing, as well as maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region. So the Australia Economic Strategy Report, which I've been working on, along with the CII and KPMG teams over the past 2 years, is finally ready for a release tomorrow, hopefully at the same CII Partnership Summit at the session on enhancing bilateral economic and trade relationships, and that will be at 10:45 to 12:15 hours Indian Standard Time. Now, as many of you know, the report has been prepared as a response to Australia's India Economic Strategy Report 2035, and I'm quite certain that the concrete recommendations in 20 different areas identified in the report will fit in with the development and growth aspirations of both countries. I don't have the time today to go into any details, but just once again, for everybody's benefit, to repeat these sectors, the key areas are mining and resources, technology and services, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, agribusiness, education, power and renewable energy, railways, gems and jewelry, automotive spare parts, infrastructure, and tourism. And there are some emerging areas, 8 of them, in fact, which includes labor-intensive services, defense, sports, textiles and textile designing, digital gaming and animation, water management and commercial ferries and shipbuilding, space collaborations, and finally, education technologies. So before I end, I'd like to say that the areas of collaboration have been identified quite clearly through the 2 reports that we have now. But the most important phase, I believe, is yet to begin, that of actual implementation. And how do we go about this in the post-COVID world? Firstly, in my opinion, regardless of India's stand on the RCEP, in my view, Australia and India should seriously look at their free trade agreement negotiations, which were stalled due to RCEP. And there's a lot to gain if this comes about quickly for both countries. Secondly, it is the big business, not just the SMEs and smaller business, which must get interested in each other and also explore the investment route, which I believe will drive trade. And the business to business linkages, therefore, need strengthening through more meetings between different trade bodies and associations and specific business talks. The business forum between the 2 countries has not met for many months now. This must be revived with specific working groups to work during the intersessional period with recommendations. I believe the pandemic period offers opportunities for talking and preparing on virtual platforms, just like we are talking today. And the states in India and Australia must engage with each other through this medium. Third is that the governments on both sides need to form a special group, and this is also a recommendation, a special, very important recommendation in the report, which will review implementation of the 2 reports on a 6-monthly basis. And for this, the governments and authorities concerned need to set aside some resources and some funds, which will allow for dissemination of information in the reports, discussions on removing trade and investment barriers, facilitating businesses in engaging with each other, which cut across federal and state levels, as well as across different ministries. This will include easing of visa, taxation, banking, phytosanitary, and other regulatory policies. Also, it's very important to identify sectors for mutual investments and funding, because this will become even more important in the post-COVID world. Fourthly, on the lines of the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund, the 2 sides should start a joint startup and innovation fund, as well as a humanities and social sciences collaboration fund, with a modest contribution, in my view, of $10 million by each side over 5 years for each of these funds. It will have its own momentum thereafter. And finally, once the pandemic eases, both sides should seriously work towards starting direct flights between major hubs. There is no substitute, in my view, to direct flights for increasing trade, investments, tourism, and people to people contacts. So let me stop there, Tanya, and let the panelists discuss the details of taking this important relationship forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Wadwa, for your comments, for giving us a preview into the Israeli economic strategy and its importance. One of the things you've highlighted is that many of these sectors can actually continue despite being currently in a COVID context. For while mobility has never been more frustrated, which has impacted tourism and education, certainly other sectors can proceed as connectivity has never been higher. And as you rightly point out, we can certainly engage through virtual platforms to take our business forward. Today, we are very fortunate to have a distinguished panel to explore the current economic settings, reforms that have had to take place as economies seek to reset and recover from the COVID crisis, the largest global economic crisis since 2008. And we are represented by infrastructure investment in Macquarie Bank, education and skills through Deakin University, and cyber, AI and banking through ANZ. I would now like to introduce the esteemed panel before I commence these proceedings. First, we have Penny Burt, Group CEO of AsiaLink. Penny has more than 25 years of experience in diplomacy, trade and investment, international business and consulting at senior levels across 4 continents. She was also with consulting firm McKinsey & Company and is also a former senior diplomat with the Australian government, having represented Australia in Asia and the United Nations. Penny is a member of the Australia-India CEO Forum and has been a delegate to the Australia-India Leadership Dialogue. We also have with us Ravneet Pawar, Global Deputy Vice President and CEO South Asia of Deakin University, Australia. With over 28 years of experience in the international education and training sector, Ravneet has been instrumental in establishing global collaborations and strategic partnerships. She set up the Deakin University office in 1994, the first ever international university office in India of any foreign education provider. She has received numerous prestigious awards for her efforts and has been continuing to lead strong collaboration between Australia and India in education during this 2020 year. We also have with us Ben Way, Head of Mira Global Alternatives, CEO Macquarie Group Asia. Ben is the head of Macquarie Infrastructure and Real Assets, otherwise known as Mira, and based in Hong Kong. Since joining Macquarie in 2006, Ben has held leadership positions across Macquarie's Taiwan, Seoul, and Beijing offices. He has also led the establishment of funds that have invested in a variety of sectors, including utilities, renewables, communications, transport, and water. Ben sits on the investment committee of Mira Asia Pacific Funds, including the Macquarie Asia Infrastructure Fund, which has also invested into India, and we look forward to hearing more from him. Then we have Sanjeev Bajaj, ANZ Chief Executive Officer in India. Sanjeev Bajaj is country head for ANZ and has overall responsibility for ANZ's business growth in India. Prior to joining ANZ in February 2015, Sanjeev was CEO for Credit Suisse's bank branch and head of the fixed income business in the Credit Suisse in India. He's responsible for delivering fixed income capabilities across sales, trading, research, and structuring for the India franchise, and also has experience in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity in the banking sector. And last but not least, we are fortunate enough to have with us the Honourable Lisa Singh, former Australian Senator and Tasmanian Government Minister with 20 years of parliamentary experience. She was the first woman of South Asian heritage to be elected to the Australian Parliament and is currently the head of advocacy for Walk Free, an international human rights organisation working to end modern slavery, and a very important focus for the International Labour Organisation for 2021 to end forced child labour. Representing Australia as an influential professional, Ms. Singh has been advancing Australia's social and economic ties with India and the wider Indo-Pacific for the past decade. She has actively participated in a number of inter-country dialogues with the Australia-India Institute, the Lowy Institute, and the Australia-India Youth Dialogue, and was recently nominated to the Australia-India Council. So I welcome our very esteemed panel and thank you for joining us. We will now be looking at different aspects of the Australia-India relationship. And to start us off, I'd like to turn to CEO of AsiaLink, Penny Burt, to think about the economic context in which we find ourselves. The economies have been under great stress since the global financial crisis, and each country has had to undertake many reforms. What reforms has India taken this year that Australia could be interested in, and where would the attractiveness be for Australian business in your view, Penny?
Thank you very much, Tanya, and thank you very much for the warm welcome and for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. Let me first of all start off by saying, I think as both the High Commissioner and the Ambassador have highlighted, while it might have been an extremely challenging year overall, it's actually been a really positive year for the Australia-India relationship. And a combination of, our Prime Minister's Summit, the new Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, and of course the imminent launch of the new Australia Economic Strategy Report, for which congratulations, Ambassador and CII, actually provides a fantastic basis for us all to move forward and transition through this difficult COVID period. So, as you said, Tanya, for both countries, the COVID-19 pandemic has posed major economic challenges. As we know, both countries have had sharp declines in economic growth for the year, significantly increased unemployment, pressure on small to medium-sized businesses, challenges in specific sectors, particularly those that are globally exposed, and fractured supply chains. On both sides, our governments have actually released major economic support packages designed to help cushion the economic impact on business and on the most vulnerable in our communities. It's actually been extremely important in keeping our economies moving forward. Those packages have been widely welcomed, and at the moment, pending a greater degree of control over the pandemic, both the IMF and the World Bank are predicting quite strong bounds in both economies in 2021. In terms of the specific reforms that the Indian government has taken in the context of its effort to transition through COVID and support the economy, it's taken a number of initiatives, I think many of which were touched on by Ambassador Wadhwa, that are very important overall. Those I think that are of key importance for the Australian business sector include liberalisation of the agriculture sector. The new laws, which, let me point out for an Australian audience, will allow farmers to sell their farm produce at a price of their choosing, and even outside their respective states, will actually significantly drive rural incomes and a degree of liberalisation in the sector that is going to be positive. The entry of private players into the sector is also going to bring, we hope, a very significant bump in investment. And agribusiness is, of course, one of the sectors identified on both sides in the India and Australia economic strategies as a key area of opportunity. Second area I'd like to touch on and highlight, which is important in terms of reform, is steps that have been taken to liberalise the coal and mining sector in India, which actually should benefit the mining equipment and technology sector overall for the longer term. And that's another area that's been highlighted in the economic strategies on both sides. And it's quite important actually that we understand in Australia the longer term changes that that might bring about in the mining sector. There is also a group of wider reforms by the Indian government that will enhance the business environment overall. I think our earlier speakers have touched on some of those, but they include a reduction in the corporate tax rate for existing companies and for new investments, easing tax compliance through the use of new technology platforms, and in a very important step forward, the simplification of national labour laws with the reduction of around 44 separate laws into 4 significant codes. I think for business, we can't underestimate the impact that's going to have. As Ambassador Wadwa just noted, Cabinet has also announced new incentives across 10 sectors and specific new initiatives in health. Australia is very, very well placed, as we know, to be collaborating in the health sector, and particularly in medtech and pharma, amongst other areas. And we do expect more reform to be coming from the Indian government. I think it's actually worth drawing out, as the High Commissioner did very briefly, that in the context of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, there are actually a number of specific measures that will address this transition through the COVID period and specifically address some of the challenges that our companies have had. The first, of course, is the extension of the Strategic Research Fund to allow additional research on COVID response. The second, of course, is, as we've seen, a huge acceleration in reliance on the digital economy in all its aspects during COVID. The new agreements on digital economy and cyber have come at just the right time to help support that acceleration of digital in both of our business communities. And lastly, something that I feel is really important is for us to recognise that small to medium-sized enterprise are actually the backbone of both of our economies. And they've suffered disproportionately through this COVID period. So the provisions in the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership that commit both our governments to enhancing cooperation on the SME and medium to small sized enterprise sector, including a commitment to better integrate those companies into our supply chains and into global supply chains, very directly address some of the challenges, economic challenges we've seen in COVID. The need for supporting SMEs, the need to capitalise on this new digital opportunity, and the need to recognise that supply chains are fragile and we can double down on helping our companies there. Going forward, a key watch point is, of course, that while we're building domestic economic resilience, and that's important for all of our countries, staying the course on that longer-term liberalisation of trade and investment is going to be really important for long-term recovery. So thank you, Tanya.
Thanks very much, Penny, for that overview. Certainly, there's been a number of initiatives and incentives that have been announced this year to support domestic economy growth, as you said, not least at Manipur Bharat, which the High Commissioner referred to, or self-reliance for India, and how these initiatives have in fact supported small business, as you've said, rightfully impacting both Australia and India as a large share of our economies. But you also highlighted the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund, as Ambassador Wadwa did as well, which promotes research between our two countries. It's the highest research fund that Australia has with any country in the world and has been going for more than a decade now, from strength to strength. This seems a very appropriate point, in fact, to turn now to Ravneet, as the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund supports science and technology, research and education ties as well. So Ravneet, one major change obviously this year has also been the new education policy released by India, which is the first education policy in more than 30 years, set to revolutionise India's education investment and also investment in research. From where you're sitting, how does the new education policy and other commitments, for example, under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, which also references education, support cooperation from your perspective as a South Asia Global Head for Deakin?
Thanks, Tanya, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, High Commissioner, for your comprehensive address, and congratulations, Anil Wadwaji, for the CII AES. Deakin University has had a long-standing relationship and association with India for the last 26 years. One of the things that does come to my mind really at the moment is that this education policy, the new education policy after 34 years in India, is a big welcome change. And I do believe that this is going to change the face of how Australia and India engage and interact in the education, research, and skilling space. And education, research, and skilling actually are the foundation of a symbiotic relationship between India and Australia. India has the youngest population in the aging world, and I think the population actually is a benefit to the Australia-India relationship going forward. The demographic dividend is likely to boost the economic growth, urbanization, and the workforce availability, and also capacity for skilling and education between India and Australia. The new education policy and its emphasis on internationalization, accreditation, digitization provides an opportunity to enhance the Indo-Australian collaboration around education, research, and skilling. EduTech design of open and distance learning products and facilities, such as virtual classrooms, joint initiatives, and projects, is going to be the way forward. Greater support for research collaboration within the two countries, I think, such as the AISRF, continuation of the AISRF, and new initiatives between the India-Australia relationship is going to add a much, much big rigor between the two relationships. I think the critical areas to really think, if you actually look at the NEP and in reflect of the Australia economic strategy, is that India is looking at world-class institutions being set up in collaboration with the government here. Australian universities and education institutions have a strong chance to work with the public-private partnership in that space. Multidisciplinary approach has been the focus of Australian education for a long time. I think India has opened up to that. And this new education policy encourages Indian institutions to look at the multidisciplinary approach for comprehensive education. Regulatory reforms, the much welcome support to the education and skilling sector in India is a very, very important part of collaboration. And I think that this is going to help the two regulatory bodies to engage, interact, and interface to see how this relationship can go forward in enhancing the focus around building world-class institutions in India with Australia. Expansion with quality and access. Australian education institutions have believed in access and equity for a very long time. And I think India has the need and the requirement for that, which is very clearly identified in the national education policy. There is a lot of symbiotic possibility relationship between India and Australia to ensure access and equity across the region. Research ecosystem. I've been a great fan of the Australian education research ecosystem because it is comprehensive. It is focusing on world problems, and it also encourages internationalization. I think India has a lot to gain from that, and there is a much better possibility of getting out projects which actually matter to the world and will reform the way Australia-India relationship moves forward. Governance and leadership, again, with Australian institutions is a very important part of how India, in its NEP, can work through. Academic freedom, institutional autonomy are a very important part of all of this. The public-private funding and the collaboration is a very new term for India in education and skilling. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for Australia and India to work in that corridor. Internationalization and digitization is the focus of NEP as well. And I think that Australia is extremely well poised in focusing around areas of advancing culture, society, and the economy between the two countries, building safe and secure communities, creating smarter technologies, enabling a sustainable world, and improving health and well-being. I think these areas, Tanya, are really important for collaboration for our communities, for our societies, and for the citizens of the country. As mentioned in the report, and as indicated by the High Commissioner and the Ambassador, I think manufacturing, advanced digital manufacturing, circular economy, healthcare, affordable healthcare, health tech solutions, food, agriculture, environment. I think are a couple of areas where there is immense possibility for education, research, and skilling to play a very important role as we move into a much more stronger collaboration. Infrastructure through smart cities, future transportation systems, resource management are areas of interest. Defense technologies around research, robotics, haptics, virtual and augmented reality, again, play a very important role. Sports science and entrepreneurship, especially women entrepreneurship, is a very, very important aspect of engagement. So I think that, as Minister Pokhriyal had said in his address, that India's focus is on building world-class institutions through partnerships that deliver high-value local programs and blended models. And I believe that Australia is in a very good position to support India, and for India to support Australia, it's basically furthering the future endeavors through education, research, and skilling.
Ravneet, thank you so much. You've highlighted some very important sectors that education can actually support. Often education is seen as its own sector, but of course, without proper investment in education, we fail to have the innovation and the critical minds and thinking necessary to underwrite the innovation, science and technology leadership required for 21st century engagement on our global challenges and for a 21st century economy. So very well made points. And to Ambassador Wadwa's point also about investment in humanities, we need investment in humanities to underwrite critical thinking, to pave the way for strong democracies, which Australia and India both have. I'd now like to turn from our foundational discussions on education to perhaps foundations in infrastructure and other sectors, and underwriting that with key investments. And there's no better person for that than obviously Ben Way. Ben, you've been engaged for quite some time now in Indian investment, particularly looking at infrastructure. There are a lot of opportunities, it seems, but also challenges that India itself has addressed through looking at strategies to address its non-performing assets and other issues to make sure that brownfields and greenfield investments can be more attractive to foreign investment. What has been your experience to date, and what are the opportunities for investments in the years to come?
Great. Well, hi everyone. It's great to be here at the CII Partnership Summit. That's a great question, Tanya. We've been investing in India for more than 15 years, and the investment thesis for India remains the same as it did 15 years ago as it does today. If anything, it's becoming more attractive, and that's even allowing for the short-term impact of COVID. And I think the key attractiveness of India is it's got favourable demographics, it's urbanising quickly, it has talented entrepreneurs, it has great local partners, and it's got a huge appetite for technology adoption. And so what that means is that there's a growth story in India that's particularly driven by the domestic economy that makes it a heavyweight market for any serious investor. And by heavyweight market, I mean you've got a big population, you've got a big opportunity set, and India is keen to bring capital into the market to help it achieve its goals. So from our perspective, that makes it a very attractive market to have a locally led team that really understands the nuance of the market. That doesn't mean that India doesn't have challenges, but quite frankly, every market has challenges. And what it's about is accepting the fact that each market is different, that each market has a certain nuance in terms of the way it works from a regulatory point of view, the way it works from a social point of view, the way it works from a funding point of view, and to work out how you can acclimate into that market, ensuring that you're bringing your expertise and your standards from around the world and be successful in that particular context. So the approach we have in India is different from the approach we have in other markets because we want to be locally relevant. And when you think about what are the two big themes across Asia that are particularly pronounced in India, they are digitalization and the move to a low carbon world. And the digital story in India, as an example, is extraordinary. There will be 1 billion internet users by 2025 in India. there will be probably 200 new low-income smartphone users over the next couple of years. That means that people who are maybe struggling to connect with electricity now have the power of a smartphone, because we've seen great innovation in India where people can access handsets at a much lower cost. And of course, what we've seen in India also is a 95% drop in data prices over the last 5 years, which has had a profound effect on people's ability to access the digital economy. And that's obviously played out in things like e-commerce and other things. And to support that, what it's done is created huge opportunities for people like ourselves that want to invest in logistics. So that plays out in terms of the need for more cold storage logistics. It plays out in the need for more toll roads and better transport infrastructure. It plays out in terms of the opportunities that present itself in terms of data centers and fiber networks, and so on. And so that's what's creating these opportunities and what has allowed us to deploy really significant amounts of capital into scale businesses, but also where often our capital is being used to continue to grow those businesses to meet the broader demand. And the same thing is being seen in the energy transition in India, where there is clearly a very big appetite to fund and run world-class scale renewable businesses, but increasingly we're seeing opportunities in things like energy storage, and also at a slower rate, but I think a rate that's soon to accelerate, things like electric vehicles and all the infrastructure and network that's required to support that shift. And a lot of that's happening because of really great government policy and government support. And it doesn't mean that, it's much harder to govern a country than it is to run a business like ours, and we accept that. And governments have much bigger issues to deal with than simply attracting investors. There are many stakeholders that they have to balance. But I would say that on the whole, I think the government has done a really terrific job of making it easier to do business in India, of being very welcoming of all different sort of capital pools, including the sorts of capital that we manage, which is global institutional capital. And also, I think being very, very proactive in listening to the feedback of people like ourselves so that they can continue to reform policies and laws, but also be open to things like the selling of assets that were once perhaps in government entities into people like ourselves, so they can use that capital for other initiatives. And I think the last big theme, which I think is being really embraced, which is great in terms of India, is ESG. And that's much more than just environmental concerns. Increasingly, it is around governance, it is around income inequality, it is around having investments that can do well but also do good. And so, we're incredibly proud to be part of that evolution in India. And if you just think about our largest investment at the moment, which is the Safeway toll road network, which was the first privatisation of roads by the Indian government, we now have shifts that are all women shifts, because we know that creates a better environment to get more women into the workplace, but also have them feel more safe and more comfortable as they return to the workforce to run our operations there. And so that's just one thing that we can do that obviously has an amplifying effect in the economy, which again, I think is directly in line with the way the government is helping business evolve in the Indian setting.
Thank you, Ben. No, that was really wonderful to also highlight the importance of investment as a real enabler of the other sectors as well. In speaking through some of the things that Macquarie does look to and invest in India, you touched on cold chain supply, which is obviously critical for health and vaccines and other medicaments to be transported to people in need across India. Food delivery as well, particularly for micronutrients, requires cold chain supply. You mentioned toll roads and other networks, which is critical for transport for increase of efficiency of those types of products to be delivered. You mentioned energy and energy storage, and of course the importance of networks for electronic vehicle charging, which is picking up in Australia and of course is a major priority for India. And you also mentioned fibre optic cables, which of course received large investments in India this year, including their very ambitious investment in the Andaman Islands to increase their fibre optic network there. So all really important points. As we turn now for other aspects of enablers. We need to think about cyber and cyber-enabled critical technology as enablers as well for banking, among other sectors. And I'd now like to turn to Sanjeev Bajaj. Sanjeev, ANZ has been in the market for a number of years now, which has moved from back-end services in India and increasingly moving to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. Ben mentioned the focus of electronic motor vehicles for India in its 21st century economy development. Cybersecurity and being a cybersecurity provider to the world is, of course, another one. Can you tell us a little bit about ANZ's presence in India and why you've chosen India to partner for these critical emerging technologies?
Thank you, Tanya. First of all, it's a privilege and an honor to be on this panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, High Commissioner and Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. I will just go back to a point that High Commissioner referred to, which was around facilitating trade and capital flow across geographies. We at ANZ have clearly this as one of our key pillars for our mission, which is to facilitate trade and capital flows. And India has proven to be an extremely successful experience for ANZ as we sort of, have established our presence out here over 25 years ago in the technology space. So I'll just like to talk a little bit about that and what kind of work they're doing and how fruitful this relationship between India and Australia has been for ANZ. The Bangalore Service Center is at the core of bank's strategy and has been in existence, as I said, for over 25 years, providing technology and operation services to ANZ Group entities globally. It has a vibrant and diverse workforce of over 6,000 employees with an average age just above 30 years. It's a diverse population with over 37% and growing, women being part of that. Started back in late 90s, ANZ Technology Services Center is one of the earliest examples of how these were set up in India. Since 2006, we've added operations offshoring to the service center. The service center has rapidly moved up the value chain to all aspects of transaction management and enablement services, including decision-making aspects thereof. I'll give you an example. 90% of all our global trade finance volumes are handled in the Bangalore Service Center. 60% of the mortgage business is done here in Bangalore. Now you can imagine, especially in this time when we had over 6,000 people working from home, we continued to sort of service this and make sure there was least possible disruption to the business. So it's worked very well. Over the years, the Bangalore Service Center has come up the value chain and provides knowledge services to the group, including economic research, credit risk and undertaking, business and client insights in the core domain space areas, which are important, even including global project management and driving transformative initiatives as such. We believe that the Bangalore provides us with a great talent pool and a vibrant tech and IT ES ecosystem, enabling access to latest technologies and scale. And that's why India works very well. It's the age dividend that Ravneet spoke about. It's the education that Penny spoke about. It is the English language. It is basically the technology capabilities which have sort of allowed us to maintain this. Just moving to the digital transformation and talking a little bit about what we are doing in the space of AI and machine learning. Now, we've sort of, since 2015, the center has made a strategic decision to just move as much possible to digital as possible. We have, at this point in time, over 80% of our processes have been touched by automation. This includes end user automation as well. And with the help of macros and SharePoints, more than 30% of high voluminous processes are being conducted through this. We have over 3,000 robotic process automation solutions that already are working at the Bangalore Service Center. AI and machine learning are core for our growth and our efficiencies, and will continue to drive it. Just in terms of output, basically, we've seen the digital transformation has helped the center by efficiency by about 20 to 30% over the last couple of years. We've improved customer responsiveness by about 40% and allowed for high value, add additional roles for basically people who are working here to make sure we continue to provide them opportunities as we go along. That's it from me, Tanya.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. And again, you've usefully touched on the fact that in order to make cyber and AI work in India, you've highlighted some of the fantastic attributes that India certainly has, including the demographic dividend, the focus on education, and digital transformation. These are key themes that have come up consistently throughout the presentations today. I would now like to turn to the Honourable Lisa Singh. Lisa, in addition to you being a good friend of the Australia-India relationship, a consistent ambassador for Australia-India business ties, including your recent appointment to the Australia-India Council, your participation as a delegate to the Australia-India Leadership Dialogue and the Australia-India Youth Dialogues, you now work as head of advocacy for Walk Free, which I understand also ties in a very strong business relationship in order to enhance the commitment of philanthropy to labour practices. Can you tell us a little bit more about the trends you've noticed between Australia and India, and whether there are advantages to commitments to strong labour practice in continuing trade and investment ties between Australia and India? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tanya, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the CII Partnership Summit today. Can I also acknowledge and thank the opening remarks from High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell, and also congratulate Ambassador Anil Wadhwaji for his delivery tomorrow at our preview today of the Australia Economic Strategy in response, of course, to the India Economic Strategy. And also my colleagues on this panel, Penny, Ravneet, Ben, and Sanjeev, yes, for their contributions so far. Tanya, I think to sort of answer that question, looking at the broad trends to facilitate greater trade and investment, I'd like to divide it into sort of 4 different themes. And I think the first one is that there is still a lack of understanding at the business level, I think, between Australia and India. And this is despite, recent gains, there is still an outdated perception, I think, that persists in both the Australian and Indian business communities. We know there's been a lot of strengthening of the bilateral relationship over the last 5 years, and lots of ongoing geopolitical developments bringing us closer together. And they have certainly enhanced our understanding of each other. But insight into the current sort of sophistication of the Australian and Indian economies and what could be gained by working closer together is often lacking among businesses, including at the highest level. So I think that's why that despite what Penny said, COVID-19, being obviously a challenging year, we have still made some gains, and it's important to see and recognise some of those practical interactions that have occurred. The Australia-India Business Exchange obviously is one of those, bringing some 100 Australian delegates together. The Bengaluru Tech Summit only a month ago, I think, saw about 180 Australian representatives participate globally, virtually in that. And I think now, if we look at that, there is, continuing to be lots of interactions like that. They will help ensure that currently and crucially, the next generation of Australian business leaders understand India has demographics on its side, a long entrepreneurial tradition, an expanding consumer class, significant headroom for productivity improvements, and obviously part of that should be labour standards, and with its tech talent, strong potential for disruptive innovation. So I think there's lots of scope to improve on that lack of understanding. The second point is the importance of government And I think this is where, government's focus remains an absolute necessity. While our economic ties will ultimately rest on commercial decisions and interactions between Australian and Indian businesses, there is a relationship where government will have to continue to be part of the equation. And I think government has a crucial role to play to raise awareness, highlight the opportunities, support strategy formulation, build capabilities and relationships. And we've seen, as we've already talked about today, strong commitments on both sides with the relationship now at a comprehensive strategic partnership level. And under that CSP, the Australian government's ongoing implementation of the India economic strategy, and now as its imminent launch tomorrow, as Ambassador Wadhwa referred today to the Australia economic strategy in response. And I was very pleased to hear Ambassador Wadhwa highlight one of the recommendations to be a sort of review after, I think it was 6 months or thereabouts, into those two strategies to sort of measure the effectiveness of them, because I think measuring that is crucial for the Australian and India economic relationship to grow, so we can actually see the progress. Thirdly, I think India demands different thinking, and I think Ben touched on this. Ben, you said that each market has to be nuanced and locally relevant. I think that is absolutely spot on, and it was also great to hear Ben mention ESG as an important factor in business development, something that at Walk Free, we work a lot with business on ESG and CSR, those components of business, ethical business practices. So I think that where Australia is already supplying high quality resources to fuel Indian manufacturing and infrastructure development, as well as high quality agricultural produce to India's urbanising population, it's now increasingly well accepted that Australia will not be able to just replicate wholesale its model of economic engagement with East and Southeast Asia to India. Investment and services will be key to that partnership, but in a similar way, businesses need to meet the market they're dealing with as well. So, Australian businesses, for example, might need to engage in a sort of blank sheet thinking about the Indian market rather than simply adopting products or methods that have worked somewhere else in another region. And so I think, from a business standpoint, that more granular approach, the better. And given, I think, we've seen the variations in the economic recovery from COVID-19, it makes that granular approach, particularly on a particular sector, even more possible and important. And I think that's, again, where Ambassador Wadhwa referred to in his Australia economic strategy, identifying sectors for mutual investment and funding as an important component of that. And finally, the fourth one is something I've been championing for a long time, and that is the importance of the Indian diaspora. The Indian diaspora in Australia is rising in significance. It will continue to have a greater role in creating business linkages and expanding trade and investment with India. Again, that was another key pillar of the India economic strategy. It's now, some near 700,000 strong in Australia. The Indian diaspora already makes a significant contribution to Australia's economy and society, and it's got a very high entrepreneurial community, second highest tax-paying diaspora in Australia. And as Deputy Chair, I'm pleased the Australia-India Council is playing a strong role to elevate the achievements of the Indian diaspora in Australia, because that is key too, to better harnessing the diaspora for the benefit of the economic relationship. There's a lot more work, though, that could be done in identifying diaspora networks that could be sort of most effective in plugging into that economic relationship. So with that sort of backdrop, Tanya, of those sort of four key points addressed, I think some of the challenges that we've seen can be overcome, and the emerging opportunities and partnerships will continue to grow for both countries. Of course, I would like to see that through a sort of ethical lens in terms of business, addressing some of those issues that Ben touched on with ESG, good governance, high labour standards and the like being part of that. But of course, our two countries share so much in common as to thriving democracies that I think those issues can be addressed and to the success of our economic relationship going forward.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You highlighted some really important mechanisms by which we can look at sustainability as well. We often talk about sustainability through an environmental prism, but you've also been the importance of an ethical lens as well. So your focus on good governance, which is also part of the the comprehensive strategic framework, was something very good to highlight. You touched on corporate social responsibility, ESG, of course, and good labour practice. So I think that combined with a focus on what 21st century economy looks like could certainly take us forward. It's been a fantastic panel so far. All of you have highlighted the different areas in which your sectoral strengths can go from strength to strength between the two relationships. One question I wanted to put to each of you before closing, starting with the High Commissioner, is we've all talked about the positivity in which, while we're in a challenging environment, there are mechanisms that can take the trade and investment relationship forward. Ambassador Wadwa, as others of you, and Lisa, you just now highlighted, the importance of a twice-yearly review, or a way in which governments can be held accountable, if you like, to these strategies in order to give them life. High Commissioner, you started by saying that the Australian government has taken the initiative with the India economic strategy by, in fact, implementing already 26 practical initiatives under the IES to be implemented already. And you gave the example of AISRF, among other things. As one example from each of you, we'll try and keep it to a minute each before closing. What is another way in which Australia and India could perhaps further improve their trade and investment ties in the current climate, whether by focusing on things like RCEP, where the broader global rules-based order is under threat? Are there other ways in which we can improve relations, or any other bilateral mechanism? Thank you.
Controversially, I'll say at the outset, Tanya, that I think the RCEP decision is behind us. We need to be looking forward. Governments will always make decisions on national interests, and we shouldn't be anchored by the past. I have to say, on the basis of today's discussion, I'd be putting Ben in TV advertisements to do something that too often we don't see, which is tell the success stories that exist within India. And there are many companies, including ANZ and others, who have had a good experience here because they've come in, looked around, partnered in some instances, but seen the opportunities and succeeded. And I think, Lisa, if I can be so bold, as a former Deputy Chair of the Council, that's another of the roles that the Australia-India Council should have, which is to spread the good news, because too often when you talk to people in Australia about business, you get the hoary old stories, which do nothing to further the progress. I think Anil's recommendation around 6-monthly reviews of reports are very good, but I should say for the record that since I've been here, there's no shortage of internal reporting going on. So I'm not sure it's as bad as Macquarie Bank, but we certainly do have to report progress on a regular basis.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. Ambassador Wadwa, you've already given your 6-monthly review recommendation. Is there anything else you'd like to add before closing about ways in which we could strengthen the trade investment relationship?
So, Tanya, I would, amongst the various recommendations that I've mentioned, I think what's most important is that the frequency of businesses meeting each other and concentrating on specific sectors is extremely important. While in Australia, I certainly felt the need of specialized delegation exchanges. And in today's circumstances, we cannot expect that to happen face to face. But certainly, more of these can be organized in the interim through the virtual medium. I'll pick a specific example of medical technologies. And when I was in Adelaide, for instance, there were about 160 odd companies which wanted to meet personally with companies in India and Bangalore and otherwise to actually, start some kind of business relationship. So that needs to be facilitated. What has happened is that we have been talking at the macro level in business for a very long time, but it needs to be actually a focus needs to be generated on matchmaking. And that can only happen if you have specific sectors engaging with each other. We can pick 4 or 5 or 6 sectors to start with. But that must be done because we have all the identified sectors. Unless the businesses start talking to each other and try and connect, this will not happen. And for that, the governments can easily facilitate, and so can the industry associations and the Chamber of Commerce. And I think that's where they should concentrate, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Wadhwa. Penny.
Look, I wouldn't disagree at all with either the High Commissioner or the Ambassador. I would actually just double down on those recommendations and say 3 things. Number 1, I love the idea of meeting regularly to review progress, but would suggest that rather than government just reflecting on that, which, as the High Commissioner says they do already, bring together a joint group of government and senior business representatives, not just to take the temperature, but to actively problem solve on any of the roadblocks and obstacles. And to do that in, the spirit of collaboration and openness, but for there to be a process where business on both sides can actually actively bring things to the table. The second point I would make is I would absolutely agree. I think the fantastic strategic work that's been done on identifying sectors and opportunities needs to be operationalized. And there is a big role, for whether it's the business councils, and CII does a fantastic job, organizations like AsiaLink, we need to jump in and do the how-to. They're really granular, to use your word, Lisa, boot camp, sector by sector, where we can unpack the opportunity and then make those connections that are so vital. So it's just, again, not disagreeing, but just pushing that we activate and operationalize that idea. I think the last thing we really need to do is, again, it's just doubling down on making sure that these contacts are happening at the highest levels and that our CEOs are talking to each other and speaking regularly. The CEO Forum hasn't actually had the opportunity to meet recently. We now know that we can do this fantastically virtually, although it never really compensates. But I just think increasing that tempo and getting to know each other. And I'm going to pitch this idea separately to everyone, but getting whether it's Ben or some of the other key CEOs to do a CEO speaker series where they're sharing the success stories would be a fantastic thing. And we'd love to collaborate on something like that. Thanks, Tanya.
Excellent idea for speaking a brand new initiative. Ravneet.
So I think the first thing is really, as Ben said, you've got to really think about what works in India. And in my view, India is a relational market. And I think that Australians will need to be regularly in touch. India does not do business at a distance. So we've got to really be mindful of that. And I think regular connections are a very important part of doing business. The second thing is that patience. Both countries will have to have the patience to grow substantially but firmly. I think passion is very important for India with Australia and Australia with India. And I think that passion and people, the people-to-people linkage and the connections at various levels is a very important part of growing business. And then establishing partnership. I think that without partnership, we are not able to move forward individually. So I believe that the governments are meant to set platforms and policies, which have been done, and provide a base for businesses to be active. I think we now are in a stage where some bit of activation has happened in the second phase, which is the business-to-business area. And we talk about corporations, academia, to come together to really form the how. And I think the third is to ensure that we build in the people-to-people linkages going forward, whether it is through tourism or it is through connectivity at this point of time with COVID-19 here. But I think the regular focus on building and reviewing is a very important part of the strategy. And I think that it's important to really break down into narrow areas and then establish a 3-tier approach to build on those areas. For example, if we pick up energy, what Australia can provide India and what India can provide Australia can be identified. We can have the CEO level engagement. We can have a business to business level engagement. We can also bring in education and skilling into that. So these centers of excellence in maybe 5 areas to be established between India and Australia going forward, which are multi-layered, multitasked, and also provide a holistic picture of engagement from a government policy to a business to business, to a people to people, and to education and training. I somehow feel something like that in terms of setting up a system between the two countries would go forward quite well. And I think that the other point really that I'd like to make is that collaborative approach and Australia to understand what strengths India has. And like Sanjeev said before, that it is important for Australians to also get the good picture. Sometimes it is difficult to do business in India, but there is capability and capacity that can be provided to ensure that there is a platform already existing and it's not completely greenfield. So I think that the P's are important: patience, persistence, passion, and partnership.
Thanks very much, Navneet, and nice choice of words with nano areas. A nice reference shout out to your nanotechnology centre between Deakin and Terry as well. Ben, your brief final closing remarks?
Look, I'd agree with everything that has been said so far. I suppose the question that we play over in our heads is, why do you need to pitch the need for closer relations to a country of 30 million people versus a country of 1.3 billion people? It's a ridiculous kind of pitch to make because it should be self-evident, I think. And so I think the thing that we really need to focus on is what is stopping the sort of business and corporate world building better relationships and having a better relationship that's more productive. And I think there are 2 things. One is continuity. I don't think there is enough focus on having relationships built on continuity where the same people turn up. And just because they don't get an answer or the perfect outcome on meeting 1 or trip 1, which let's be frank, never happens, realize that actually if you're going to build a relationship, you've got to turn up and you've got to go 4 or 5 or 10 or 15 times. You've got to put a team into the various market and have them there and give them time over the medium to long term to build out those relationships, and also know that sometimes mistakes will be made because you're doing new things. So I think the first thing is there needs to be a much bigger focus on continuity. Government to government does that well, but business does not do that well because it lacks patience. And the reason that partly I think it lacks patience is a lack of curiosity. So, and everyone on this call will have heard this before, but because you've been to Delhi once does not mean you know India, just as because you've gone to Sydney or Canberra once, equally you do not know Australia. You need to be curious to make these relationships work, I think, and to really find the opportunities. And so I think we need to, in a low, in a way that is sort of supportive and helpful, not prescriptive or over the top, help particularly Australian business be more curious about India and understand that, that there's actually something magical going on in that market, and we need to embrace it, because if we don't embrace it and take the opportunity, we are going to get beaten to it. And the fact of the matter is people are already, way ahead of us in terms of the curve. And a great example is the Canadian pension funds, who are deploying enormous amounts of capital that have teams on the ground that are going direct, unfortunately, for us, but are going direct because they've already crossed that Rubicon. And we need to make sure that Australian investors and Australian business get there quicker, because if not, the opportunity will move away from us. So I think it's continuity and it's curiosity.
a very good point, and I think curiosity is key and really underpins the cultural and people-to-people linkage ties as well. I also hope people get a takeaway that you should be curious about Canberra too, as a Canberran. Very proud of this city. Sanjeev, your final closing remarks.
Sure, Tanya, it's tough to go after what all's been said. I completely agree with what's been said. There's some fantastic work that's been done by Peter Verghese a couple of years ago, and I'm sure there's some wealth of information that will come out as the report by Ambassador Anil Wadhwa gets released tomorrow. The question really is, how do you convert that into action? And to Ben's point, I think most of the time, whatever interaction I've had, it is about, is an Australian company, or for that matter, an Indian company, curious enough to find out what's on the other side? And I think that the role really at this stage is, how do we convert this wealth of information and take it across to board levels on both sides and get them to sort of start engaging? And who all can facilitate that? It can clearly be, business councils, it can be CII, it could be others. How do we sort of make sure we sort of doing our best to get everybody involved and getting that information out there and getting that awareness? And I think that's the crucial stage at this point in time. It will have to be, let's identify 2 or 3 sectors or 2 or 3 companies, put them in touch, take them to the end point. Once you set that example, you see the ball rolling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. And finally, Lisa.
Tanya, well, all good points raised by everyone. I just want to pick up on High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell's point. I think that's an important aspect of the Australia-India Council, to champion those achievements that Australia and India at the business level or at the educational level or the like are making. I think we don't do enough of that. And obviously, as decision makers and policy makers and business people, we all sort of address the challenges and look for opportunities, but sometimes can forget to smell the roses, so to speak. So I think it's an important point. Out of everything that's been raised, though, the only other sort of addition I'd like to make is the fact that we, going into 2021, will be hopefully going into a post-COVID environment, and therefore both of these strategies, the India economic strategy and the Australia economic strategy, need to be looked at in that environment. And obviously, when Peter Verghese authored the India economic strategy, it was not in a pandemic, and the sort of sectors and the states that he focused on in India were not through, obviously, looking at the challenges that a post-COVID world might bring. So some of the important sectors that need to now be of focus, I think, need to be reviewed in looking at the India economic strategy. I'm sure that Ambassador Wadhwa has obviously crafted this in a time where pandemic has taken place, so some of that has been able to be taken into account. But I think things like pharmaceuticals and healthcare, they have to be sectors at top of priority because of the fact that we are entering in this post-COVID world, and these are some of the needs right now facing both populations in India and Australia, all across the globe, but economic opportunities for both of our countries too. So that sort of post-COVID lens, I think, is an important factor when looking at these economic opportunities that come out of these two strategies as we build back better. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Lisa. We're just several minutes over time, but I think it's been a cracking panel and a wonderful way in which we can forecast and preview the welcome of the Australia Economic Strategy by Ambassador Wadhwa tomorrow. To the High Commissioner's point, continuity is certainly key and has been featured among Australia's engagement to India as well. High Commissioner O'Farrell mentioned the Trade Minister's Australia Business Exchange delegation to India in February. That was preceded, of course, by Foreign Minister Payne's Raisina Dialogue keynote in January of this year also. And then Ravneet highlighted Minister Dan Tian's meeting late last year in November with Minister Pokhriyal on education. So we do have consistent high-level people-to-people linkages at very senior levels, and I'm sure that will continue when travel is again allowed. I'd like to thank the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for the opportunity to moderate this very important session. I'd like to acknowledge that we're in very good company in being able to host a country session with Germany, Japan, Singapore, Ukraine, Rwanda, Brazil and Nepal being other country sessions that have been hosted during this CII Partnership Summit. And thank very much the Confederation of Indian Industry for having Australia's participation. A very quick highlight for tomorrow, if you would like to catch the Australia Economic Strategy, you'll get to see a more in-depth analysis from Ambassador Wadhwa and High Commissioner O'Farrell, including messages from our trade ministers, Birmingham and Goyal. That will be at 10:45 a.m. IST, which is 4:15 p.m. Australian time, followed by the Indian Economic Resurgence session, which has Peter Baggies in it. So I'd like to give a little plug for that. Thank you very much, the Honourable High Commissioner and Ambassador Wadhwa, for your time and for the incredibly distinguished panel. The one takeaway that I'll leave you with is the words of Barry O'Farrell: spread the good news. You've all done an amazing job here today, and I hope that energy will continue. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Abe.
Yeah, thanks, Penny. Thanks. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thanks, Ambassador.
Thank you, Tanya. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Neil.
So, I'll end this now.
Yeah, end this now, and you can speak to this guy Ari. He's waiting for your call.
Yeah, I'll do that right away.